He was only 8 when the world decided to break him. At his father's funeral, while others wept for loss, little Jamal was already living his next nightmare. No one knew that behind the sympathy smiles and whispered condolences, a monster was waiting for him at home. Days later, his bruises told stories his lips were too scared to speak, until fate intervened in the most unexpected form: a billionaire's dog. When that black Labrador stopped in front of an abandoned shed and refused to move, police followed. What they found inside changed everything. This is not just a story of pain, but of courage, justice, and the strange ways truth finds its voice. Before we begin, let me know where you are watching from. Leave your country name in the comments below. And if you love stories about courage, loyalty, and community, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. The boy didn't move when Sarah approached. He stood like a statue carved from sorrow, his soaked shirt clinging to his thin chest, lips trembling, not from the cold, but from something that lived behind his silence. Sarah's heels sank into the muddy ground as she knelt in front of him, her voice soft but trembling with urgency. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered. "Where's your family?" The boy's gaze flicked to the gravestone. The name carved on it was Thomas Gray. The moment Sarah read it, her heart twisted. She'd known that name. Thomas had been her late business partner's brother, a quiet man who worked as a carpenter in the town's outskirts. Sarah turned to look around. The cemetery was empty except for the wind, the rain, and the distant flash of lightning splitting the sky. Max, her German shepherd, paced in circles near the grave, his nose close to the wet soil. Something made him uneasy. The boy finally spoke, barely audible over the rain. "My dad's gone." His voice cracked, breaking the silence like glass underfoot. "They said it was an accident." Sarah's eyes softened, but her instincts told her there was more. The way the boy's fingers dug into that photograph, an old image of him sitting on his father's shoulders, told her the story hadn't ended with a funeral. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated before whispering, "Eli." The name hung between them like a fragile prayer. Sarah reached into her coat pocket, pulling out her scarf and wrapping it gently around his shoulders. "Eli, do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" He shook his head. "I'm supposed to go home," he muttered, glancing toward the woods that bordered the cemetery. "Uncle Mark said I can't be late." Sarah frowned. "Your uncle?" "Yeah. He doesn't like when I talk to people," Eli said, shrinking back slightly, as if just saying the name made him afraid. A thunderclap rolled across the sky, and Max suddenly growled, low, steady, protective. The fur along his spine bristled. He turned toward the trees, eyes locked on the shadows shifting between them. Sarah rose slowly, her pulse quickening. "Eli, stay behind me." From the darkness, faint movement. Maybe an animal. Maybe not. She couldn't tell. The rain blurred everything. The tombstones, the trees, even the road behind her car. Then, a crunch. Footsteps on wet gravel. Heavy. Purposeful. "Uncle Mark?" Eli's voice broke, trembling with a strange mix of hope and dread. No one answered. Sarah scanned the tree line, her hand instinctively brushing the small gold cross that hung from her neck. Her faith had been the only thing that kept her grounded after her own losses, after her parents had been buried beneath the same kind of sky years ago. She knew the look of a child who had seen too much, too soon. And this boy, he carried a kind of pain that didn't come from grief alone. "Eli," she said softly, crouching to meet his frightened eyes. "Listen to me. You're not going back there tonight." He looked at her, eyes widening. "But he'll be mad." Max barked again, sharp and urgent, pulling at his leash toward the woods. Sarah followed his line of sight and froze. A shadow darted between the trees, too tall, too fast to be an animal. She couldn't make out the face, but she saw the outline of a man. Watching. Then he vanished. Sarah grabbed Eli's hand. "We're leaving, now." They hurried to her car, the rain pounding harder as thunder cracked overhead. Max jumped into the back seat, still growling low. Sarah started the engine, but as the headlights cut through the storm, she noticed something. A small, muddy figure standing by the cemetery gate. It was the man. He didn't move, didn't flinch. Just stood there in the rain, watching her drive away, eyes glinting beneath the brim of a soaked hat. Eli turned in his seat, whispering, "He's not supposed to be here." Sarah's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Who is he, Eli?" The boy's lips quivered, but no words came. His eyes dropped to the photograph still clutched in his hand. The edges were torn now, smudged with mud and rain. But in the corner of that old picture, Sarah noticed something strange. A reflection, a blurred figure in the background, someone standing behind Thomas and Eli, staring straight into the camera. Sarah's breath caught. "Eli, who took this picture?" He didn't answer. Instead, he whispered something so faint that she almost missed it over the roar of the rain. "Dad said, don't ever let him find me." The car lurched as lightning flashed again, illuminating the boy's pale face. For the first time, Sarah saw what lay behind his eyes, not just fear, but memory. And somewhere, deep in the storm, Max let out a long, mournful howl, as if he already knew the danger that was following them home. By the time Sarah's car pulled into the long driveway of her estate, the storm had turned the sky into a churning ocean of thunder. The mansion's lights glowed dimly against the darkness, tall windows casting reflections across the wet ground. Eli sat curled up in the passenger seat, gripping the photograph as if it were a lifeline. Sarah parked and turned to him. "You're safe here, Eli. No one's going to hurt you." The boy didn't answer. His eyes followed Max, who jumped out of the car and trotted toward the front door, still alert, tail rigid. Every sound, the slam of a car door, the whisper of wind, made Eli flinch. Inside, the house was quiet, except for the ticking of a grandfather clock and the crackle of a fire Sarah had left burning earlier. She led Eli to the warmth, gently helping him out of his soaked jacket. Steam rose from his sleeves as she placed the garment near the hearth. "You must be freezing," she said softly. "I'll get you some dry clothes." Eli looked around, eyes wide at the tall ceilings, the portraits, the marble floor that gleamed under the firelight. "You live here, all alone?" he asked. Sarah hesitated. "I do, but it doesn't feel empty." She smiled faintly, then added, "It's full of memories, and sometimes that's enough." When she returned with a blanket and one of her old sweaters, Eli was standing in front of a framed photograph on the mantel. It showed Sarah in her early years, surrounded by children at a charity event, kids from broken homes she'd once funded through her foundation. Eli's gaze lingered on it, as if he recognized something. "You help kids like me?" he asked quietly. Sarah knelt beside him, wrapping the blanket around his shoulders. "Yes, sweetheart. I try." He nodded, though the shadow in his eyes deepened. "Uncle Mark says no one can help me. He says I'm trouble." Sarah's chest tightened. "You're not trouble, Eli. You're just hurting." Max lay down near the fireplace, head resting on his paws. But his ears stayed upright, listening. Every now and then his eyes flicked toward the window where the rain still poured in thick silver sheets. The dog was uneasy, and Sarah felt it too, a lingering weight in the air that refused to lift. Later, after Eli had eaten, Sarah examined the photograph he'd been holding. She studied the man in the background, the blurred figure behind the father and son. The more she looked, the clearer it became that the person wasn't standing still. His body was slightly angled, as if he were mid-step. watching, approaching. Her intuition whispered a warning. "Eli," she said softly. "Your father's name was Thomas Gray, right?" He nodded. "Can you tell me what happened? The night he died?" Eli's fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. His voice trembled. "They said he fell from the barn roof. But..." He stopped. "But what, Eli?" His lower lip quivered. "I heard shouting, and then..." He squeezed his eyes shut. "Uncle Mark told me to go to my room. He said it was an accident, but I heard Daddy scream." Sarah froze. Her hand instinctively reached for the cross at her neck. "Did anyone else hear it?" He shook his head. "No one believes me. The police didn't even come." Sarah's breath caught. "No police? A man's death ruled an accident without investigation?" It didn't make sense. Max suddenly lifted his head and barked, sharp, warning, eyes fixed on the window. Sarah turned quickly. Through the sheets of rain, she could see headlights flicker at the end of her driveway, then vanish. Someone was out there. She stood, heart pounding. "Eli, stay here," she said, but the boy grabbed her arm. "Don't go," he whispered, fear etched across his face. "If it's him, he'll be angry." "Who?" Sarah asked. Eli's answer was so soft, it was almost a breath. "Uncle Mark." Thunder rolled again. Sarah crossed to the window, peering through the darkness. The long driveway stretched into the trees, and for a moment, she saw nothing. Then, there, a dark silhouette near the gate, motionless, like before, watching. Her hand trembled as she reached for her phone, dialing the local police. "Detective Harris speaking," came a calm voice on the other end. "This is Sarah Bennett. I think someone's following me, and a child who just lost his father. I need an officer sent to my estate immediately." "Understood, ma'am. Stay inside and lock the doors." Sarah hung up, securing every latch and curtain in the room. Max paced near the door, growling low, his instincts sharper than any alarm system. Minutes passed. The rain softened to a whisper, and in that uneasy quiet, Eli spoke again. "Miss Sarah?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "Dad said, if anything bad ever happened, I should tell someone about the box." Sarah turned. "What box?" Eli pointed to the photograph. "He buried it under the tree behind the barn." Her pulse quickened. "What's inside?" "I don't know," Eli whispered, eyes darting toward the window. "But Dad said it would keep me safe, if someone ever tried to hurt us." A sudden gust of wind slammed against the glass, making Sarah jump. The fire flickered violently, throwing shadows across the walls. Then, a sound from outside. Footsteps on wet gravel. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Sarah's heart stopped. She motioned for Eli to stay quiet. Max stood, muscles taut, teeth bared. The front gate creaked open. "Stay behind me," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Lightning flashed, and through the window, she saw him. A man in a dark raincoat, standing by her porch, his face hidden beneath a dripping hat. Then came the knock, 3 slow, echoing raps against the door. Eli's whisper was almost a sob. "It's him." Rain poured harder through the night, drumming against the windows like restless fingers. Sarah stood by the window, still clutching her phone long after the call had ended. Her reflection looked pale, haunted, while lightning painted streaks of white across the glass. Mark Gray was dead, and yet someone had stood on her porch asking for Eli by name. Behind her, Eli sat motionless near the couch, knees drawn to his chest, Max curled protectively at his feet. The boy hadn't spoken since Harris's revelation. His silence carried a weight too heavy for a child to bear. Sarah turned, crouched beside him. "Eli, honey, listen to me. We're going to figure this out. You're safe here." He looked up, eyes glistening with fear. "What if he finds me again?" Sarah reached out, touching his shoulder gently. He won't. Not tonight. Tomorrow, we'll go to the barn your dad mentioned, the one with the box. If it's important enough for him to hide it, it might tell us who's behind all this." Eli hesitated, then nodded. His voice was barely a whisper. Dad said the box was the truth. Those words lingered in Sarah's mind long after Eli drifted into an uneasy sleep on the couch. She sat awake through most of the night, every creak and gust of wind keeping her alert. Even Max refused to rest, his eyes fixed on the door as if waiting for another knock that never came. When dawn finally broke, the rain had softened into mist. Sarah brewed a pot of coffee, her thoughts heavy and unsteady. The world outside looked deceptively peaceful. Dew on the grass, the smell of wet earth, and gray clouds slowly giving way to morning light. Detective Harris's car pulled up at 7 a.m. sharp. A tall man with dark eyes and a steady expression stepped out, trenchcoat damp from the road. Sarah met him at the door, exhaustion etched into her face. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Of course," Harris replied. "Let's take a look at this barn before the weather turns again." Eli trailed close behind them, holding Max's leash. The boy's grip was tight, but the dog's steady presence seemed to give him courage. The drive to the Gray family property took less than 15 minutes. The barn stood at the edge of the woods, old, half-collapsed, and blackened from fire. The air around it smelled faintly of smoke and damp timber. "This is where they found Thomas," Harris said quietly. "The fire was ruled accidental, but something about the report never sat right with me." Sarah's eyes scanned the ground, then the warped remains of the barn door. "Eli said there's something buried near a tree," she said. "A box." Eli pointed to the far corner of the property, where an old oak leaned over the field, its roots half exposed. "There," he whispered. They walked over, the earth soft beneath their boots. Sarah knelt beside the tree, brushing away wet leaves. "Do you remember exactly where?" Eli nodded and began digging with his hands. Harris fetched a small shovel from his car, and together they worked until metal struck wood with a dull clink. Sarah's breath caught. Beneath the soil was a rusted tin box, small but heavy. Harris pulled it free carefully, brushing away mud. The latch was old and stiff, but with one sharp tug, it gave way. Inside lay a bundle of papers, a flash drive, and a folded photograph. Sarah reached for the photo first, and froze. It was Thomas, standing with Mark. But behind them was another man, the same man Sarah had seen last night. The same cold, gray eyes, half hidden by the brim of a hat. On the back of the photo, in faded ink, were 3 words. "He's not Mark." Harris leaned closer. "What the hell?" Eli's small hand trembled as he reached for the photo. "That's him," he whispered. "That's who was at your house." Sarah turned to Harris. "Who could it be?" He examined the flash drive. "We'll need to see what's on this. But if Thomas hid it and wrote that message, it means he knew someone was impersonating Mark before he died." Eli's face paled. "Dad said a man came around asking questions about the will. He said he was Uncle Mark's friend." Harris's brow furrowed. There was no mention of a will in the report. "Maybe because someone destroyed it," Sarah said, her voice low. "Or they didn't want it found." Before Harris could respond, Max stiffened, ears perked toward the woods. A faint crunch of footsteps echoed in the distance, slow, careful, deliberate. "Get behind me," Harris ordered, reaching for his holster. Sarah stood protectively in front of Eli as the sound grew nearer. The air thickened with tension. From between the trees, a dark figure emerged. The man moved with a strange calm, his coat slick with rain, the brim of his hat shadowing his face. "Detective Harris," Sarah whispered. "That's him." The man stopped 10 feet away, hands raised slightly, not in surrender, but control. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, voice smooth, chillingly calm. "That box wasn't meant to be found." Harris drew his weapon. "Hands where I can see them." The man's lips curved into a faint smile. "You have no idea what you've stepped into." "Who are you?" Sarah demanded. He tilted his head, gray eyes locking on Eli. "Let's just say, I'm finishing what your father started." Eli clung to Sarah, shaking. "He's lying," he whispered. "Dad said he was dangerous." Harris took a cautious step forward, gun steady. "Sir, stay where you are." But before anyone could move, the man turned and sprinted toward the woods. "Stay with the boy!" Harris shouted, chasing after him. Sarah held Eli close, her heart pounding. The sound of footsteps and breaking branches faded into the distance, until all that remained was the hollow rush of wind through the trees. Eli looked up at her, tears welling in his eyes. "He knows where we live now, doesn't he?" Sarah didn't answer. She just looked down at the box, the photograph, and the words that haunted the back of it. "He's not Mark." For the first time, she wondered if Thomas's death wasn't just murder, but part of something much bigger, something reaching far beyond one family's grief. And somewhere deep in the woods, a faint echo of Max's growl rolled through the mist, followed by a single gunshot that shattered the morning calm. The forest fell silent after the gunshot. The sound had been sharp, final, and then swallowed by the mist. Sarah's breath came fast, her hands gripping Eli's shoulders as they both stared toward the dark tree line. "Detective Harris?" she called, voice trembling. No answer. Only the faint whisper of wind and the drip of water from the oak leaves above. Max barked once, short and urgent, and then bolted into the woods. "Max, no!" Sarah cried, but the dog had already disappeared into the fog. She turned to Eli, her heart pounding. "Stay close to me. Don't move, no matter what." They waited. Each second dragged on like an hour, until finally, a sound. Footsteps, uneven, approaching. Sarah tensed, ready to grab the shovel beside her, when Harris emerged from the mist. He was limping, his coat torn, face streaked with blood from a shallow cut. "Detective!" Sarah ran to him. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," he said, breathing hard. "He's gone. I lost him near the creek. He knew the land too well." "Did you see his face?" Harris nodded grimly. "For a second. He's not Mark Gray. Whoever that man is, he's been watching this family for a long time." Sarah helped him back toward the car, her mind racing. The box, the flash drive, the photograph. Whatever was on that drive had to explain why Thomas Gray had died, and why this stranger was willing to kill for it. They drove back to Sarah's estate in silence. The storm had finally passed, leaving the world drenched and gray. Eli sat in the back seat, staring out the window, clutching Max's collar when the dog finally reappeared from the woods, mud-caked but unharmed. When they arrived, Harris set up his laptop on Sarah's dining table and inserted the flash drive. A small folder appeared, labeled simply, Gray Industries. Sarah frowned. "I thought Thomas was just a carpenter." "He was," Harris said, opening the folder. "But his brother Mark used to work for a company called Gray Industries. Private contracting, low-level security projects. Government contracts, supposedly." Lines of documents filled the screen. Blueprints, invoices, and financial statements that didn't add up. There were hidden transfers, offshore accounts, and signatures that matched neither brother. "This isn't small time," Harris murmured. "These are corporate-level falsifications." Eli leaned forward, brow furrowed. "Dad said Uncle Mark was keeping secrets. He said people were watching him." Sarah scrolled through another file labeled Confidential. Site 14. Her eyes widened. It was a series of reports describing containment units and experimental tracking. Nothing made sense, except for one line near the bottom. Test subjects to be relocated under new identities following accident at facility. Her heart dropped. What kind of work did they do here? Before Harris could answer, A video file caught his attention. Footage 01 MP4. He clicked it open. Static filled the screen for several seconds. Then the image cleared, showing the inside of the same barn they had just visited. Intact, before the fire. Thomas Gray stood in the center, his expression tense, speaking into a small handheld camera. "If you're seeing this," his voice trembled, "it means they found me. My brother's dead, or soon will be, and they'll make it look like an accident. The man calling himself Mark isn't my brother. He's part of something bigger. They're using our names, our lives." The video glitched, and Thomas leaned closer, whispering urgently, "Protect Eli. The files on this drive prove everything. He's next on their list." The image distorted into static again. Then the final frame flickered. A man appeared behind Thomas, stepping into the light. Sarah's blood froze. It was the same face from the photograph. The imposter. Thomas turned, startled, and the camera fell to the ground. The last sound was a struggle, then the crackle of flames. The video cut out. No one spoke. The silence in the room was suffocating. Eli's eyes filled with tears, his hands trembling. "He tried to warn me," he whispered. Harris exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Whoever that man is, he's been assuming identities, killing them off one by one. Thomas must have discovered it while working on those contracts." Sarah nodded, her mind spinning. If these files are tied to government experiments or data leaks, this isn't just murder, it's a cover-up. Eli wiped his eyes. He said, "The truth would keep me safe, but it just makes everything worse." Sarah crouched beside him. "No, Eli. The truth is the only thing that can stop this." Before she could say more, Max's ears twitched. The dog lifted his head, growling again, low and guttural. "Not again," Harris muttered, reaching for his weapon. "Stay here." Sarah turned off the laptop screen and grabbed Eli's hand. Max padded toward the hallway, nose lifted, sniffing the air. There was a sound outside, soft but unmistakable, the metallic click of a car door closing. Harris moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to see the long driveway. A black sedan sat idling near the gate. The driver's door opened, and two men stepped out, dressed in dark suits, earpieces glinting faintly in the light. "Federal?" Sarah whispered. Harris frowned. "Maybe. Or maybe they just want us to think that." The men started walking toward the house. Sarah's pulse quickened. "Detective, what do we do?" He glanced at her, voice low. "Whatever's in that drive. They've come to take it." Max growled louder now, pacing near the door. Eli clutched Sarah's arm. "Are they bad people?" Sarah's answer was simple but steady. "Anyone who hides the truth is." The first knock came, a firm, official rhythm, but it carried the same eerie weight as the one from the night before. And as Sarah met Harris's gaze, she realized something chilling. This wasn't just about Eli's father anymore. It was about everyone who had ever trusted the wrong name. The knock came again, louder, more impatient. Sarah froze, pulse thundering in her ears. Harris held a finger to his lips and motioned toward the back door. Max's low growl vibrated through the air as Eli clung to Sarah's arm. "Whoever they are," Harris whispered. "They're not here to talk." He moved silently toward the window, peering through the narrow gap between the curtains. The two men stood on the porch, black suits pristine despite the mud, faces calm, too calm. They looked like agents, but something about them felt wrong. Their stance wasn't defensive, it was predatory. "Detective Harris," one of them called, voice muffled through the door. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to speak with you and Ms. Bennett about a matter of national interest." Harris's jaw tightened. "They shouldn't know my name," he murmured. "I didn't report my involvement yet." Sarah's heart sank. "Then how—" "They're tracking the flash drive," he said. "They knew we found it." The pounding on the door intensified. "Open up," or we'll be forced to enter. Harris pulled Sarah and Eli toward the back hall. We need to move, now. They ran through the corridor, the house echoing with each hurried step. Max stayed ahead, ears flat, tail low. The moment they reached the kitchen, the sound of splintering wood thundered from the front. They were in. Out the back! Harris hissed. He threw open the door, and a rush of cold wind and rain hit them full in the face. The dawn had faded beneath a new wall of storm clouds rolling in from the east. Sarah grabbed Eli's hand. Hold on to me, sweetheart. Don't look back. They sprinted through the garden, past the marble fountain, and down the slope toward the gravel drive. Behind them came the heavy thud of boots and the shouts of men. Stop! Federal agents! But Harris didn't stop. He fired a warning shot over his shoulder, the sound sharp and commanding. Keep moving. The car was parked near the gate, a black SUV Sarah used for charity runs. Harris threw open the driver's door and barked, In! Max leapt into the back first. Eli climbed after him, and Sarah slid into the passenger seat. Harris slammed the gear into reverse just as the first man burst from the trees, gun drawn. A single shot rang out. The rear window shattered, glass spraying like rain. Eli screamed. Sarah turned, wrapping her arms around him. It's okay, baby. It's okay. We're fine. The SUV sped down the rural road, tires screeching against the wet asphalt. The forest blurred past on both sides, thick and endless. Harris's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. They're trained, he said, breath ragged. Military or something close to it. Then who are they? Sarah asked. If not the FBI, what are they? Harris hesitated. Black Ops, private sector cleanup crew, the kind corporations hire when they can't risk exposure. Sarah's stomach twisted. They killed Thomas to keep this buried. And they'll do the same to anyone who knows, Harris said. That means us. Lightning split the sky ahead, illuminating a winding stretch of highway that led toward the mountains. Harris veered onto it, tires skidding briefly before regaining traction. Eli wiped at his tears, voice trembling. Are they gonna find us again? Not if I can help it, Sarah said, determination flickering through her fear. Your father left us clues, Eli. That video, those files, someone has to hear the truth. Harris nodded. There's a man I trust. Agent Monroe. Works off the grid, doesn't answer to the Bureau. If anyone can help, it's him. They drove for miles before Harris finally slowed the SUV near an abandoned gas station off the main road. The storm raged around them, wind howling through the broken windows of the building. He killed the engine and turned to Sarah. We'll rest here for an hour, then we move again. Sarah nodded, helping Eli out of the car. The old station smelled of rust and oil. Max padded inside first, sniffing the corners. For the first time since the chase began, the boy's shoulders eased slightly as the dog curled up beside him. Sarah looked at Harris. How far can we trust Monroe? Far enough, he said. But this goes higher than him. That drive, we only scratched the surface. Site 14 wasn't just a project code. It was a facility, hidden somewhere in these mountains. Sarah frowned. You think Thomas found it? Harris nodded. And died for it. Sarah stared out at the rain beating against the cracked glass windows. Then that's where we go next. If we can find Site 14, we can prove what really happened. Eli stirred from the corner, clutching Max's collar. His small voice cut through the storm. Dad said the people at the facility, they made monsters. Harris turned sharply. Monsters? Eli's eyes were wide, frightened but certain. He said they weren't supposed to exist anymore, but one of them escaped. The words hung in the air like ice. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, a low rumble shook the ground beneath their feet. It wasn't thunder. It was closer, heavier. The sound of an engine. Harris moved to the window and peered out. A pair of headlights glowed through the rain, drawing nearer. Company, he muttered. They found us. Sarah grabbed Eli, pulling him close. What do we do? Harris looked toward the rear door, jaw set. We run. North, through the woods. There's a hiking trail about half a mile from here. We follow it to the ridge. They won't risk helicopters in this weather. The SUV outside slowed to a crawl. Eli's voice trembled. They'll hurt you if they catch us. Sarah looked him in the eyes, fierce and unflinching. Then they'll have to go through me first. Outside, lightning flashed again, illuminating the black sedan stopping just yards from the gas station. 2 doors opened in unison. Max stood, growling. Harris raised his gun. Go, he ordered. Now! Sarah grabbed Eli's hand, sprinting through the back exit into the storm. The cold rain lashed against them as they ran, their footsteps splashing through puddles, hearts pounding. Behind them, men shouted orders. Gunfire cracked through the night. And above the chaos, the sky erupted with thunder, drowning out everything but the sound of Sarah's voice as she whispered through the storm. Run, Eli! Don't stop running! The rain felt like shards of glass slicing through the darkness as Sarah, Harris, and Eli climbed the narrow mountain trail. The storm roared, lightning flashing over jagged cliffs that seemed to breathe with every gust of wind. Max led the way, his fur soaked, barking occasionally to keep them moving. Keep low, Harris shouted over the wind. They'll have drones searching once the storm eases. Sarah could barely breathe. Her chest burned, her legs screamed, but she didn't stop. The boy in her arms was trembling from cold and fear. Every step forward felt like defiance, against death, against despair, against the faceless men who wanted their truth buried. After an hour of climbing, they reached a narrow ridge. Through the fog, a faint red glow shimmered from the valley below. Harris pointed. There, see that? Heat exhaust vents, underground facility. It's Site 14. Sarah stared in disbelief. The valley looked dead, but beneath it, something pulsed. The faint hum of turbines echoed up from the earth. God, she whispered. It's real. They crept down the slope, moving between rocks and undergrowth. The storm softened into a heavy drizzle, and the air grew colder. Max stopped suddenly, ears pricked, growling low. What is it? Sarah asked. Harris crouched beside him, squinting. Sensors, motion triggered. He pointed to small metallic nodes half buried in the soil. They're everywhere. One wrong move and we'll have security teams on us. Sarah frowned. How do we get past? He reached into his bag and pulled out a signal jammer. This will blind the perimeter for 60 seconds. Once I trigger it, we move fast. No hesitation. Sarah tightened her grip on Eli's hand. We're ready. Harris nodded, flipped the switch, and a faint hum spread through the air. The lights from the sensors flickered out. Go. They ran, down the hill, across the clearing, and toward a rusted steel hatch half hidden behind a pile of debris. Harris jammed a crowbar into the lock and forced it open with a grunt. The door groaned, then gave way. Inside was darkness, cold, metallic, sterile. Sarah hesitated. Are we sure about this? No, Harris said, but it's the only place left to hide. They descended a narrow staircase, the sound of dripping water echoing from somewhere deep below. The air smelled of oil and iron. Emergency lights blinked along the walls, bathing everything in a dull crimson glow. When they reached the bottom, the corridor stretched in both directions, lined with reinforced glass panels. Behind each one were rooms filled with medical equipment, broken monitors, and toppled chairs. Dear God, Sarah murmured. What happened here? Eli tugged at her sleeve. This is where Daddy worked. Harris turned sharply. You're sure? The boy nodded. He told me about the blue lights and the white doors. They moved forward slowly, their footsteps echoing. The deeper they went, the stronger the hum became, like something alive beneath the walls. Then Max stopped again, barking once. Sarah turned and froze. Behind the glass of one of the rooms stood a single figure, a woman, pale, motionless, with tubes running from her arms. Her eyes were open but empty, as if trapped somewhere between life and death. A faint pulse of light glowed beneath her skin. Sarah's breath caught. What is she? Harris pressed his hand against the glass, reading the faded label beneath it. Subject AO4, Cognitive Regeneration Trial. His voice was low. They were experimenting on people. Memory transplants, neural rebuilding. They tried to erase trauma by replacing memories. Sarah shook her head, horrified. That's impossible. Thomas believed it, Harris said. He must have found proof. Eli pointed to a control console at the far end of the hall. Dad said he left something for me there. A message. Sarah and Harris hurried to the console. The screens flickered weakly as Harris powered them on. Static filled the air. Then a familiar voice broke through, hoarse but unmistakable. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it. Sarah gasped. Thomas. I found what they were doing here. They weren't curing trauma. They were harvesting it, taking people's pain and using it to manipulate memory patterns in others. Soldiers, prisoners, even children from overseas. They called it Project Rebirth. Eli's lip quivered. Sarah hugged him tighter. They'll try to bury this, but if Sarah Bennett finds you, you're safe. She's the only one I trust. She'll know what to do. The message ended, abruptly. For a moment, no one moved. Then Harris whispered, "This changes everything." Sarah stared at the flickering screen. "We need to expose them. Every file, every name." He nodded. "We'll copy the data and send it to Monroe. Once it's public, they can't hide anymore." Before they could act, a low, mechanical whine filled the corridor. The overhead lights flickered, then blazed white. Harris raised his gun. They activated internal power. Someone's here. Footsteps echoed from the end of the hall, slow, deliberate. A shadow stretched across the floor, followed by a voice that made Sarah's blood run cold. "Well," the man said smoothly, "you've come a long way for the truth." Sarah turned. Standing there was Director Langston, CEO of the biotech company Thomas once worked for. His suit was immaculate, his smile thin and cruel. "I warned Thomas not to dig too deep," he said, stepping forward. "Now you've brought his ghost back to haunt me." Harris aimed his weapon. "Stay where you are." Langston's eyes flicked to the boy. "And this must be little Eli. You look just like your father." Sarah moved protectively in front of him. "Don't you dare come near him." Langston chuckled softly. "Relax, Miss Bennett. I have no intention of hurting him. He's far too valuable." The room trembled as if something massive stirred below. Red lights flashed across the ceiling, and alarms began to blare. Harris shouted, "What did you do?" Langston's smirk widened. "You wanted to see what Thomas discovered, didn't you? Let me show you." The floor split open behind him, steam hissing from hidden vents. From the pit rose a massive containment chamber, cracked and leaking fluid. Inside, a humanoid figure began to move. Its eyes opened, glowing blue in the darkness. Sarah's breath hitched. "Oh my God," Langston whispered almost reverently. "Project Rebirth! Lives!" The chamber hissed open with a roar of pressurized steam. The creature inside, taller than any man, stumbled forward, its skin translucent, glowing faintly from within. Its eyes, electric blue, locked on Sarah, then flickered with confusion, pain, and something almost human. Langston stood between them, arms wide, triumphant. "You see, Sarah? Pain can be repurposed. Suffering isn't the end. It's the raw material of rebirth." Thomas didn't understand that. Sarah stepped back, clutching Eli close. "You twisted his work. You turned healing into horror." Langston smiled coldly. "Healing is subjective. Humanity needs control, not comfort." Harris raised his weapon. "Step away from it, Langston." But before Langston could reply, the creature moved. Fast. It lunged toward him, shattering the glass and steel around them. Langston screamed as its massive hand clamped around his shoulder, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. The lights flickered violently. Sparks rained. "Down!" Alarms wailed. "Shut it down!" Harris yelled, diving for the console. "Sarah, get the boy out!" But Sarah couldn't move. The creature wasn't attacking. It was looking at her. Its chest heaved, and through the distortion of light and steam, she saw a flicker of something impossible. Thomas's face. "Thomas?" she whispered. The creature hesitated. Its grip on Langston loosened. Langston gasped, seizing the moment to pull a small detonator from his coat. "If I can't have control, no one will." He pressed the button. The sirens changed pitch, deeper, angrier. Red lights pulsed in rhythm with the countdown flashing on the nearest screen. "Stu Shwia. System self-destruct initiated." Harris cursed. "He's rigged the generators. The whole complex will blow." Sarah's heart raced. "There has to be a manual override. Down there." Harris pointed to a steel stairwell leading into the reactor chamber. "But it's a dead zone. No one survives that heat." Sarah looked at the creature again. "Maybe we won't have to." The thing turned toward her, trembling as if understanding the gravity of the moment. Its glowing eyes flickered weakly. It looked from Sarah to Eli, and then gently set Langston on the floor, broken but alive. Eli stepped forward before Sarah could stop him. "Daddy?" he whispered. The creature knelt, its enormous hand trembling as it touched the boy's cheek. For a fleeting instant, its light brightened, a soft blue radiance cutting through the crimson alarm glow. "Eli." It wasn't a full word, just a breath shaped like one. Sarah's throat closed. "Thomas, it's really you." Harris was at the console, typing frantically. "Sarah, I can't stop the sequence. Someone has to manually cut the coolant valves." The creature looked at Sarah again, then turned toward the stairwell. "No," she said, realizing what it intended. "Don't! You'll die." It paused, and for one heartbreaking moment, its expression softened. Eli cried out, "Please, don't go." The creature's voice came faint and broken, almost human. "Be free." Then it leapt into the reactor chamber. The floor trembled as the containment door slammed shut behind it. Through the glass, Sarah saw its light blazing brighter and brighter, overriding the countdown one system at a time. 01, Xian, 0045, 0030. Langston, writhing on the ground, gasped, "You can't stop it. It's too late." The explosion cut his words short, a muffled implosion deep beneath the floor. But instead of fire, a blinding wave of light burst through the cracks in the walls. Blue, not red. The alarms stopped. The screens went dark. Silence filled the corridor. Sarah fell to her knees, tears mixing with the soot on her face. Eli clung to her. Max whined softly, resting his head on her lap. Harris approached, limping, covered in dust. He did it. He shut it all down. Sarah stared at the glowing remnants flickering beneath the cracked floor. He saved us. Outside, dawn had broken. The storm had passed, leaving only mist curling over the mountains. They emerged from the facility, exhausted, trembling, but alive. Eli turned back one last time. "Do you think he's gone?" Sarah brushed his hair from his forehead. "Not gone, sweetheart, just finally free." They stood together at the edge of the ridge, watching the first light of morning spill across the valley. It was quiet, peaceful. Harris broke the silence. "What now?" Sarah lifted her gaze towards the horizon. "We tell the world what he died for. Every lie, every experiment. People need to know that faith and pain can't be controlled." Harris nodded. "I'll get Monroe to set up the drop. Once this goes public, there's no going back." Sarah smiled faintly. "Good." The world needs a little truth again. Eli tugged on her hand. He said we'd be free. Does that mean we're safe now? She looked down at him, eyes glistening. It means we start over, not by forgetting him, but by living the life he wanted for us. A gentle breeze swept through the valley. Max barked once, chasing the wind. The faint sound of church bells drifted from somewhere distant, a reminder that even after the darkest nights, morning still finds its way home. Sarah knelt beside Eli and whispered, "Your father didn't die in vain. His light will live in us." As they walked toward the sunlit path, a faint blue glow shimmered in the mist behind them. Brief, radiant, and then gone.